Since 2012, Egypt has been facing a pretty serious diesel shortage. Now that in turn has spurred a rise in food costs, long queues at filling stations and electricity blackouts to boot. To end the shortage, the country has sought extra supplies from Arab oil and gas producers. But local media reports indicate that talks with Qatar and Iraq have stalled due to payment-related disagreements. CCTV's Yasser Hakim has the details.
Egypt heavily depends on diesel and fuel. It is used in everything from cars to electricity to production plants in all industries.
Egypt produces 22,000 tons per day, but demand is 40,000 tons. The difference is imported. There are two problems. There is no money to import it, and it's subsidized by $10 billion annually. Secondly, because of lack of security, a large amount is being smuggled outside or sold in the black market.
Any shortages can be immediately visible with long queues at petrol stations and continuous electricity cutoffs, especially as consumption increases during the summer. This quickly leads to public anger and lawlessness. Aware that it will take time to restore security and control smuggling, the government has opted for a short-term solution of importing supplies from Qatar and other states.
Iraq, Libya and Qatar forged agreements that would provide Egypt with more than half the imported quantity of diesel at very low cost. But it has been delayed due to disagreements over pricing and arrangements of the swap deals with Qatar.
The government has also announced it will reduce subsidies on fuel starting July, which according to experts will save at least $15 billion from the budget. But it could have an unfavorable social impact.
Cancelling subsidies will shoot prices up and cause civil unrest. The government will only cancel subsidies on heavy industry, but will gradually reduce it on cars and electricity using the coupon system.
The long-term plan by the state is to convert all energy use from diesel to natural gas, which is cheaper and more environmentally sustainable. Experts hope that the government would also move quickly to adopt solar energy projects that will go a long way in solving the energy shortage in Egypt. This is Yasser Hakim for CCTV, Cairo.
Our developments in Egypt have been of interest, great interest I should add, since early 2011, and they still are today. CCTV's Yasser Hakim has been reporting on developments in the country. He joins us now live from Cairo. Yasser, what is it exactly that Egyptian, Qatari and Iraqi officials do not agree on with regard to pricing and the implementation of the swap deals?
Well, it seems that there is not enough confidence in the Egyptian economy and the government's ability to repay any money or to pay the money for the deals. So Iraq, for example, has asked for a $1.2 billion guarantee from an international bank to guarantee the Egyptian government that it can pay the deal with Iraq. Now, Qatar, we don't really know the details. All we know that there is a problem concerning pricing and method of payment. The Egyptian Minister of Petroleum is currently in Qatar negotiating the deal, and he, according to some sources in the government, that he expects the first shipment to arrive by June the 4th for 18 shipments and would end in September. Now, will he manage to strike a deal before this deadline so the shipments would come on time? This remains to be seen, but we don't know any details on that. So that's what we have on this deal issue with Qatar and Iraq.
In your package, you also mentioned that the long-term plan is to get Egyptian energy consumers to shift from diesel to natural gas. It's really easier said than done. How exactly is that plan going to be implemented?
It's true. It has already been implemented in Egypt for the past, even before the revolution, maybe mid-2000s. It was implemented on cars and taxi drivers. They would convert into natural gas instead of petroleum and diesel. Also in houses for cooking and ovens, they now are operating by natural gas. What they're planning now is to let the heavy industry move into natural gas by actually pushing them to do that, forcing them by reducing or actually cancelling all kinds of subsidies on diesel or fuel. So now to be cheaper for production costs, it's better for these privately owned industries to change or to convert into natural gas. And then they will move into electricity. They're hoping by September, if some shipments come by September, October, they would start to convert the electricity power generators through natural gas and not by the diesel and fuel. But they said it will take around 7 to 8 years to actually fully function this way.
Indeed. We'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much for your time. That's CCTV's Yasser Kim live in Cairo, giving us the latest details on the energy problems that the country is going through. Let's move on now to Libya. It hosted the 9th edition of the annual Building and Construction exhibition in its capital, Tripoli, as part of its efforts to lure investors to buy into its reconstruction plans. The North African state is looking to improve its infrastructure 2 years after the fairly violent ouster of Muammar Gaddafi after 42 years in power. CCTV's Sun Lan now reports.
Foreign businessmen have rushed into the construction boom in Libya, and the exhibition saw participation from companies from around the world, including engineers specializing in infrastructure facilities and construction.
This is the 9th version of Libya Built exhibition, which is the biggest specialist exhibition in Libya. This is the first time it takes place outside Tripoli International Fair because of requests by companies to extend the space, so we provided a 15% extension, which was constructed after the liberation. In this exhibition, we have 715 companies from 27 countries.
During the Gaddafi era, Libya's lucrative oil and gas industry made tourism less of a priority than in Egypt and Tunisia, where it was a major contributor for jobs and foreign revenues before the unrest in those countries. But despite a downturn in tourist numbers and continued violence around the country, the unrest looks unlikely to deter investors.
I wish I can have very good business in this after revolution. And I hope I can work together with Libya people to make this country more beautiful than before.
A Libyan central bank official in 2010 estimated tourism could account for between 3 and 4% of the economy within 5 to 10 years, depending on how much effort the country's new government puts into it. One construction manager says the security situation in the country has improved.
In the beginning there were some security problems all over the city, but now it is okay. They take control of the city. It is quite reasonable here. There is no problem here in the city.
Mario, a worker at the international company Ferretti, said that he was hopeful about the country's progression after the unrest.
I'm here since 6 months. I'm working here very good because in Libya everything is starting new after the war, after the fighting. The economy is starting again, is rising, there are many jobs, there are many companies here, many investment. I think that we can do good.
The security factor had a big role in the beginning because the companies would listen to what the media says about the events taking place here. But when they started visiting the companies and attending meetings, they started to feel much more comfortable.
Libya Build exhibition took place during the period of May the 19th to the 23rd. Sun Lan, CCTV.
Faced with the loss of most of its oil production since South Sudan's secession in 2011, Sudan has now been scrambling to find new sources for state revenues and foreign currency to pay for its imports. Now, the country has been diversifying to other sectors like sugar production and gold mining, and it's now aiming to become a world-class sugar producer in just under 7 years. CCTV's Carol Oyola has the details.
More than a dozen workers rushed to pack white refined sugar in a factory hall in central Sudan. Next year, management at Kenana Sugar Company hope the plant will be busier as the management plans to boost its output as Sudan seeks to increase sugar exports. Officials at Kenana factory say that there is plenty of land suitable for sugar cultivation as well as plenty of water.
For sugar export market is normally EU or Europe, and production around 400,000 tons of refined sugar this every year, with another 200,000 raw sugar to be processed to refine sugar in Kenana Sugar Company. Part of it during the crop campaign, while the other part during the off-crop. After we finish Kenana cane, we start processing refined sugar from raw sugar.
Boosting sugar production also has political goals. The sweetener is the most important food ingredient in a country where it's normal to put 3 spoons of sugar in a small glass of tea or orange juice. Sugar price is so sensitive here that it can spark revolutions. A huge spike was one reason for street protests which toppled the late President Jafar Nimeri in 1985. President Omar Hassan al-Bashir has been facing for over a year small protests over a rise in food prices. Annual inflation hit 41.4% in April, though critics say the real figure is much higher. Following a capital injection of $500 million from its main Gulf owners Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, Kenana wants to more than double its output to 1 million tons in 2015. Its affiliated White Nile Sugar Company eyes a production of 250,000 tons from next year.
And also in Sudan there is a grand sugar plan, this for producing around 10 million tons of sugar. And part of this project already started. White Nile, this start producing this year, and we have a redress here on the eastern side of the White Nile river. This is shortly will start, and this is part of the grand plan for producing 10 million tons of refined sugar in the Sudan.
That would help cover domestic demand of 1.2 million tons and leave room for more exports. Currently, all local plants produce between at least 600,000 and 700,000 tons annually, analysts estimate. By next year, the output could reach between 900,000 and 1 million tons. Sudan is one of the biggest African sugar producers after Egypt and South Africa and hopes to become a global player by 2020, competing with world leaders such as Brazil. The expansion plans also come at a time of a downturn with global excess supplies. Raw sugar benchmark futures trade less than half a peak reached 2 years ago. The International Monetary Fund has urged Sudan to use the $2 billion in expected pipeline fees from South Sudan until 2015 to reform its agriculture sector to boost non-oil exports. Carol Oyola, CCTV.
Mobile phone applications, or apps as they're more commonly known, are taking Kenya's tech scene by storm. With the growing number of mobile phone users and homegrown entrepreneurs, they're fast becoming a feature of everyday life, quite literally. This is all a part of the country's efforts to harness information technology and create its very own Silicon Savannah. But, as CCTV's Clementine Logan now reports, the country has a fairly long way to go before it can compete with its Californian counterpart.
Like many small-scale farmers in Kenya, making ends meet wasn't always easy for Shema Njoroge. But when he signed up to use the iCow app, a prize-winning platform that delivers farming know-how straight to his mobile phone, his productivity went up.
It has helped me in improving milk production. Otherwise, it used to produce very little.
iCow includes a gestation calendar, comprehensive training program and 24/7 access to a database of vets. By making access to tailored information easier and boosting the efficiency of small-scale farmers, it's hoped apps like these will drive Kenya's vital agricultural sector forward, increasing food security and bringing prices down.
Part of our bridging the digital divide is not going to be through computers and devices that are very expensive, difficult to charge. Our country has got only 20% of the population actually on the electrical grid. So it's not surprising there is a huge gap where we've got content and information, and now we don't have the devices in the middle, but we've got mobile phones.
iCow's one of many apps taking Kenya's technology sector by storm. The phenomenal success of M-Pesa, which sped up and cut the cost of financial transactions, is one example of how the growing number of mobile phone users and entrepreneurs are making apps a part of everyday life. And this innovation is raising Kenya's profile on the global technology scene.
We're at Nairobi's iHub, one of the nerve centres of Kenya's technology sector and a hub of innovation. Web designers, app developers and technology startups all come here and devote their time and resources to creating local solutions to local problems.
One example is Ineza Education, which has created a low-cost mobile platform that provides SMS-based educational tools to some of the country's most remote regions. But apps alone aren't enough to attract large-scale investment. The Kenyan government has broader plans to develop its very own silicon savannah, helping it harness the high-growth information technology market to make Kenya a middle-class country by 2030. One of the star attractions will be the Konza Techno City. Still in its early stages, it's hoped this multi-million-dollar technopolis will create some 200,000 jobs over a 20-year period, enhance research opportunities and attract outside investors. However, some analysts worry government bureaucracy, corruption and a lack of infrastructure will act as a deterrent. They warn that Konza City alone won't be the silver bullet to get the country's young technology sector up to scratch with its Californian counterpart.
From a government perspective, the thing will be hopefully to have the ministry being lean and mean, kind of just being able to move very fast and be very flexible to also respond to what's happening on the ground and provide, the kind of environment that will make it that will make this place attractive, not just for local entrepreneurs, but also for, people from out there who want to come in and do something.
Kenya may have come of age in its app development, but it must now move beyond the low-tech mobile phone if its vision of a silicon savannah is to become a reality. Clementine Logan, CCTV, Nairobi, Kenya.
South Africa's unsecured credit levels are still too small to pose a risk to its banking industry. That's according to the Deputy Governor of the South African Reserve Bank. Now, unsecured loans are loans which essentially aren't backed by any form of collateral. They're therefore riskier, but more lucrative for banks. There was a total of 452 billion rands worth of such loans in March 2013, or roughly the equivalent to $47 billion. That represented a 12% rise from a year earlier. The Deputy Governor said the amount remained a non-systemic risk when measured against total banking assets of $374 billion, and it didn't pose any threat to the stability of the banking system as a whole. Analysts and investors have been increasingly worried that lenders could be hit by a wave of bad debt after years of rapid growth in consumer lending. So then, is unsecured lending in South Africa really a big, scary problem, or just a big teddy bear casting a pretty big shadow? Let's find out. CCTV Sumitra Naidu is live in Johannesburg tonight. Sumitra, is there broad agreement with the Reserve Bank's assessment of the risk posed by unsecured lending in South Africa?
Well, Rama, this is not the first time that the South African Reserve Bank has come out with statements like this. Every few months it does come out with a statement like this to assure the public, to assure investors that there is no real problem. The banking sector is still very strong, it's well capitalized, and there is no threat of unsecured lending moving into a bubble. But I don't think that the National Credit Regulator is convinced. Just earlier this year, the National Credit Regulator warned that it would need to take some tough measures against unscrupulous lenders, as the credit regulator called it. If you look at the numbers, unsecured credit exposure grew by over 24% in the year to March to 453 billion rand. That's over the last year. Before that, in the year before, it was 364 billion rand, and the year before that, in 2011, it was around 307 billion rand. So there's been a steady rise in these numbers. Now, what the Reserve Bank is saying is that the banks are still very well capitalized to manage all of this unsecured risk. They're saying the average capital adequacy ratio of the banking system remained well above the minimum requirement of 9.5%, and the banks were remaining at 15.9%. So they still look like they're very strong and they can manage this. Whether the credit regulator is convinced, I don't think so. He's really concerned.
Indeed. Well, between rising inflation, anemic growth and rising unemployment, looking at Q1 numbers, what's the outlook for credit impairment in South Africa?
Well, just last week we saw some results coming out from African Bank. African Bank is the biggest micro lender in the country, and it reported a 26% drop in headline earnings. Now, this was a huge concern for the market, and we saw it in that share price. The African Bank's share price has almost halved from the beginning of this year. It took a huge knock on the JSE over the last week, and this was because it raised this much concern. Its loan book was growing and the debt impairments was rising, and this was the concern that it was going to hit other credit companies, other companies that are dishing out credit at this stage, and we are going to start seeing it in the earnings of these companies. So I think there is still a lot of concern around.
Indeed. Let's move on to the mining sector now. We understand the National Union of Mine Workers has called for a pre-negotiation meeting between unions and mine firms on one hand in order to settle investor jitters. What's the reaction been to their proposal?
Well, there's been mixed views from some of the analysts that I've spoken to. So the one view is that this is actually good news for the unions to actually sit down with the mining companies and the government, settle their differences almost, look at the rules, look at the guidelines. So they would smooth out the negotiation process as it unfolds. But the other view that's coming through is that this is almost interfering with the processes that are currently in place. That why are the unions now having to speak with the mining companies, with government? Why the need for this kind of communication when we do have processes, the collective bargaining council, the chambers, to actually follow through with negotiations? What exactly is going to go differently in this kind of meeting? It's almost overstepping these processes, and it could actually set a precedent that maybe some of these could change. So there's two different views as to whether this meeting is actually going to work. We haven't actually heard whether there will be a meeting as yet.
Indeed. Final question to you, Sumitra. We understand the National Union of Mine Workers has made its formal wage demands over to the Chamber of Mines. Has AMCU done the same thing yet?
No, we haven't heard anything as yet as to what their wage demands are. We do know that there were some negotiations with Lonmin on Friday, and that negotiations actually failed, and that was the only report that we got through. We haven't actually heard whether they have tabled any demands. Obviously they have, but we haven't heard of how much that is.
Indeed. We'll have to leave it there for the time being. Thank you very much for that update. That's CCTV Sumitra Naidoo shows live in Johannesburg tonight, dealing with everything from banking to mining data and, of course, the wage issues around the mining sector that has been rattling the sector and battering the rand as well over the last few weeks. Quick run through the markets now for you. Let's start on the west coast of the African continent, as we usually do here. The all-share index had a fairly good run in the morning, up about 2 percentage points. It, however, closed the day only just over a tenth higher. The all-share index in South Africa also ending the day in the green, up by well over 2/3. The 20-share index in Nairobi paring some gains from last week, ending the day down by a quarter. And the Egyptian market, the EGX 30, also down by just about a third, higher by just over a third. That's your business news today.